So I made the very brave choice to choose me for once. And I ended my marriage and I ended my relationships with my mother and stepfather. Not without a fight. I still wanted a relationship with my mother, but she said she could not be my mother and her husband's wife at the same time, and she was choosing her husband. So this was only 6 short years ago, 5 years ago since my divorce, because COVID unfortunately delayed the process with the courts being closed. But it's been a very interesting life with a lot of layers to that journey. But my healing was only able to begin about 6 years ago at that point when I chose myself. And so I think it's really important to share this with people to give them hope that, your circumstances and your past don't have to be the end of your story. You can actually start over. You can rewrite it. You can turn a nightmare into a fairy tale, as I did. And again, in 5 very short years, everything has changed.
Dana Diaz is smart, funny, and on a great life path. But it wasn't always so. She spent over 20 years in a marriage to a narcissist that challenged her very sense of identity and left her with emotionally based health problems. But Dana had the guts to say no more. She divorced her husband, got well, and is creating an authentic and empowered life for herself. She's an inspiration. Please welcome her to Bump in the Road. Dana, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Absolutely. It is a long story. I will give the short version. But my story started before I was even born. I was an unwanted teenage pregnancy to a mother that I don't think wanted any children at all. In fact, at 17, I was born on her 17th birthday, and she had her tubes tied immediately after I was born. She did not want to keep me, but my great grandma took me home from the hospital. So she in my heart was my mother, and thankfully gave me a foundation for what a loving mother would be for me in my life, and what I would hope for everybody. But we go on to set the premise for my life story was that when my mother was it was probably when I was about 5 years old. She met a man, an older man that, unlike her, lived in the suburbs, had a house, had a car, had all these things that she never thought she would ever gain on her own. And she decided to get married, and somebody had the great idea that I should go live this wonderful life with her. Because again, they thought that, coming from not so much poor in love, but poor financially, circumstances, that perhaps I'd have a better life. And unfortunately, that was not the case. My mother still did not want anything to do with me, was very emotionally neglectful of me, very dismissive of me. I was, in fact, referred to as an accident and a mistake, told I should probably have never even been born. And her husband liked me even less. He was physically abusive, extremely verbally abusive. Um, so I did not grow up feeling very good about myself, and unfortunately felt unworthy to even exist most of the time. I felt like I was a bother and a burden and everything they said I would be. So, needless to say, I fell into an unhealthy romantic relationship when I was 19, spent 25 years with another abusive narcissist. Um, it ended very violently, unfortunately. Um, and it was a real wake up call to me, particularly towards the end. I was 44 years old, very healthy, by the way, physically, just so people have a premise. I was one of those weirdos that ran 5 miles a day and ate hard boiled eggs and apples for lunch, but I was very sickly. Within a 2 week period, I lost almost 20 pounds. I was down to 93 skeletal pounds, ended up with a backpack oxygen machine. I couldn't breathe. I was having cardiovascular issues, neurological, muscular, turns out I had a lung syndrome from living in fight or flight mode for so long. At one point, the doctor said, your organs are shutting down. Your organs are literally shutting down. Whatever is causing you so much stress is going to kill you if you don't get it out of your life. And I immediately knew what it was. It was my abusive husband. It was my very toxic relationship with my mother and my stepfather that, although it wasn't physical anymore as an adult, it was still very emotionally and verbally harmful to me. So I made the very brave choice to choose me for once. And I ended my marriage, and I ended my relationships with my mother and stepfather. I not without a fight. I still wanted a relationship with my mother, but she said she could not be my mother and her husband's wife at the same time, and she was choosing her husband. So this was only 6 short years ago, 5 years ago since my divorce, because COVID unfortunately delayed the process with the courts being closed. But it's been a very interesting life with a lot of layers to that journey. But my healing was only able to begin about 6 years ago, at that point when I chose myself. And so I think it's really important to share this with people, to give them hope that, your circumstances in your past don't have to be the end of your story. You can actually start over. You can rewrite it. You can turn a nightmare into a fairy tale, as I did. And again, in 5 very short years, everything has changed. So that's a little bit about me, but we'll get into a little more deeper, wherever you would like to go with that.
Well, for one, I find the tie behind your emotional well-being and your health to be really profound. It's something I believe deeply that our emotional lives have a huge impact on our health. I've seen it in my own life, I've seen it in other people, and I think it was incredibly brave for you to just lay down the line and say, "That's it. It's about me now."
Yeah. Well, it's interesting looking back because I never put all the pieces together until, that moment, that dark night of the soul moment. But looking back, I remember being a small child, 7 years old at summer camp under a tree, holding my stomach in pain. I would have stomach aches and headaches constantly. I remember being in school, even all the way up through high school, going to the nurse for stomach aches and headaches. And they would give me a mint and tell me to go lay down because they couldn't prescribe, any ibuprofen or anything. But, all the miscarriages, I had multiple miscarriages in my first marriage, all these things. And I'm like, that was all stress. It was all the stress because I was holding it in. And what I've learned, and what people don't realize, if you don't get that energy out of you, if you're silenced, you can't speak for yourself, if there's consequences to standing up for yourself or asserting your boundaries, and you get quiet, you're holding it all in. You stuff your emotions down, they have no place to go. Yes, that's going to manifest in physical illnesses. And in fact, one of the things that my doctors told me after I developed this lung syndrome was that it actually causes inflammation in your body. And what does that inflammation do? It turns into tumors, it turns into cancers. So, arthritis, all these different autoimmune conditions, because I'm also autoimmune as a result. So it's very interesting how the emotional distress manifests physically, but it's an absolute, it's a fact. In fact, what I have is called upper airway resistance syndrome. It's classified as a sleep disorder, even though I do not snore. It has nothing to do with my sleep, but it's classified as a sleep disorder, which is why it's often missed. But the doctor said it's like having fibromyalgia and COPD all at the same time. I just veer more towards the fibromyalgia, but other symptoms include anxiety, depression, things that you would go to, another doctor for an antidepressant or what have you. So it's very common what I have among abuse victims, but very much missed by our medical community because they are looking at the symptoms and not all of it as a whole, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it makes total sense. How are you navigating the health issues?
You know what? It's interesting that after my ex moved out and things settled down after the divorce, because it took some time to settle down, um, it was almost instantaneous that most of my symptoms disappeared. And I have gained weight now. I'm a healthy weight. I don't need my breathing machine every single day. In fact, I couldn't even tell you the last time I needed my breathing machine. I am a little low on oxygen today, which is why you can hear the scratchiness in my voice and it's bringing on a little bit of a headache. But um, it's very interesting to me how you get rid of the stress, the symptoms just disappear. So I just navigate it day by day. It's something, unfortunately, that's a souvenir of my, past, but it's something that I know I can manage by asserting my boundaries, saying no, giving myself permission to say no, and by choosing me. And people think it's selfish to choose yourself, but sometimes I have to say, no, you know what? I know I commit to this, but I'm not at my best today. I don't feel good and I need to lay down. So let's reschedule, let's do it another time because I want to give you the best of me. I want to give you all of me, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I mean, too many times I think we glorify people who trudge through and push through, but I'm always reminded of when we get on an airplane, the flight attendants give their little spiel when you first get on, and they say if the masks drop down, put one on yourself first before you pick your favorite child or person that's sitting next to you, and we don't understand that because we're like, oh no, we have to put the masks on everybody else. Well, how are you going to do that if you're not well? If you can't breathe and you're not able to, do anything, how are you going to take care of other people? So I think when you look at it that way, then you start to see, oh yeah, I do have to take care of me because then I can be a better wife or father or sister, brother, worker at your job or whatever it is.
I think taking care of ourselves is incredibly important. And I think learning to understand ourselves, where we
Yes.
came from, our behavioral patterns, and all that is important too. What are some of
Yes.
the things that you did to unravel this network of abuse that you really lived with for much of your life?
Yes, the first 45 years of my life. I think it's interesting. We were briefly talking about this before we came on, but I realized how much I was not seeing the truth, even though I felt the truth. I think we feel the unease. We feel, you can feel tension. You can feel that kind of energy, but I was worried more about my son. So I would tell myself, "Oh, it's not that bad. It's okay. It's all, and I put on the smile. See, I'm smiling now. I'm putting on the smile. I'm going to the T-ball games with the cupcakes and pretending we're just a normal, happy family, even though God forbid anybody knew what was happening behind closed doors." So I think the biggest thing for me was being honest with myself and raw honesty. Um, and when I say that, I mean, sometimes I'm not saying I contributed to my abuse, but sometimes we don't take the action or we participate in some way. I don't mean offense to anybody, but, I saw where I was tolerating and excusing things
Mhm.
that I knew I shouldn't have and that I didn't want to, but I thought I was keeping the peace, but I wasn't. I had so much unrest in my soul, and that was such a disservice to myself. And so I think it was just being honest. And what helped me do that is to journal. The last couple of years of that first marriage, I held a journal where I was recording the things, the awful things that were being done or said to me, whether it was by my mother or stepfather or my then husband, and writing how I felt about it. And it's interesting because when I looked back on that journal, even last year, I keep all my journals. I was looking back and I thought, I forgot. How could I forget that? Because it was so hurtful and it was such a huge thing at the moment. And it was, but how could I forget that? Because my brain was not, I was trying so hard to see past it and to make excuses for why I was choosing to stay and to find reasons and to justify. And so I think sometimes if we can step back and look at it objectively, like when I'm reading my journal last year, I'm thinking, if somebody had said that, if I had a daughter, but if somebody had said any of these things or done these things to my son, my gosh, I would have been over there in a heartbeat, packing his stuff for him and dragging him out kicking and screaming if I had to, because nobody deserves that treatment. But that's where I say, I think sometimes we have to be honest with ourselves and say, okay, I didn't deserve it, but I also didn't do anything to get myself out of it. In a weird way, I was choosing it, but I didn't know how to deal with anything else, if that makes sense, because I had come from such a chaotic childhood. If you had shown me before or even at the same time as I met my ex-husband, if you would have had a very nice young man coming from a nice family, I would not have known what to, that would have caused me more stress than going into a 25-year relationship with somebody who treated me just like my parents did.
That makes total sense because we are inclined towards what's comfortable,
Yes.
what's familiar,
Mm-hmm.
people like us, if you will. And you see that, you see it everywhere in
Yes.
society. I mean, it's just part of human nature. One of the
Right.
things that you talk about here is, people talk about narcissists living in a fantasy world with their grandiosity and being constantly pumped up by people around them. But I think that also forces their loved ones and their families to live in something of a fantasy world where you can't admit that these things are going on, where you can't. The narcissist is often a highly regarded person out in society. No one would ever believe what they're really like behind the scenes.
Yes, I'm sitting here just nodding. Yes, 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 yes. And they're not all grandiose. My ex-husband was what we call a covert narcissist. So he actually was very insecure. Not my stepfather, however, was very quite overt. And he would tell everybody how wonderful he is and look at all the things I have. But they still have that way of baiting people into pumping them up, as you say. I always used to say I was my ex's biggest cheerleader because I thought if I encouraged him and supported him, and then he would be happy. If I bought this for him, then he'll be happy. If we achieve this, then he'll be happy. And it was never enough because it never will be. But yeah, it's all about their ego. It's all about their ego. I didn't even know what a narcissist was, honestly, until after my divorce from my first husband. So, looking back, though, everything falls into place. They have an ego, it needs to be fulfilled. And they do that in multiple ways. It's controlling you, gives them a feeling of power, baiting you into compliments makes their ego feel fulfilled. Having things, material possessions, and I always used to feel special to my ex because he would always say, "Oh, my beautiful wife," and it made me feel so nice. Everybody wants to feel that and hear those words, but I started to realize at one point, I think I was just like a show pony to him. That he could take me places and say, "Here's my beautiful wife," and that doesn't feel good anymore. So it's always about what is serving them, what makes them feel superior to all others, because that's eventually their end goal with any relationship or any action that they take in life.
Is part of feeling superior to others putting other people down?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's the number one thing that they do is they diminish you. People always ask me for red flags, and I'm more into like, okay, I was probably the red flag, honestly, because if I hadn't been so insecure and unworthy myself, and if I knew I deserved more, I would have never put myself in those situations, to fall in love with somebody who treated me so disrespectfully. But it's the vulgar language. I mean, I will not say what my ex-husband called me, but it was basically my name for 25 years. And it is such a vulgar, profane thing to call somebody that you supposedly care about and love. Um, it's just there's so many signs in front of us. And yes, they put you down if you achieve, even in childhood. I strove. I was that overachiever, honor roll, first chair in two orchestras, not just one, but two, and, best at everything, but it didn't matter. None of it mattered. It was always dismissed or unacknowledged because for some reason, anything I achieved, you would think that you're pleasing your mother, you're pleasing your stepfather, you're making them proud. No, it was some threat to them in some way because I actually said it, I say it quite often. I could not be more than what they thought me to be, which was nothing, so I could not rise above any level that they had already predetermined for me. And no narcissist, no matter whether it's your parent, your partner, your sibling, your coworker, it's especially prevalent in the workforce, you cannot be at their level or higher. You have to be below them for them to feel secure and unthreatened. But the second they see potential or any success or achievement on your part, you become a threat. You become a threat to their security with themselves. And they will target you and they will take you down in any way that they can.
One of the things you say on your website is so victims are silenced, called crazy, and told to get help. That, my friends, is gaslighting, which is a form of more emotional abuse. And to continue to manipulate and abuse those of us who are directly traumatized is just cruel. Do you think narcissists have an inkling of how cruel they are?
You know what? It's funny because they don't. I think it's intentional, but I honestly don't believe that they understand the level of cruelty. A common thing for narcissists is that they actually I always think they're good publicists because they spin things around. They are always the victim. And it's funny when I look back at my childhood, I remember always telling my little friends, oh, my mother and stepfather have another story. They were always, conspiring to create a story. That's what I call them. So they'd take what happened and they'd come up with, and my mother would even come to me and say, this is what we're going to say to people. Nobody needs to know this. This is the story. And that's what we're going outside that door with. And it was so unnerving to me. I mean, I remember this back being 5 years old and being told what the story was going to be, and it wasn't the truth. And so I was learning that, okay, it wasn't okay to be who I was. It wasn't okay to be honest. It wasn't okay. There were all these rules and restrictions around who I was, where I came from, what we were supposed to be, what people would accept, what people wouldn't accept. We should conform. We should, all that's a lot for a 5-year-old. And this went on my whole life. And I think that's why I'm so unapologetic now. People tell me all the time, you're so authentic, you're so real. I am just done being dishonest. And like you said with the gaslighting, I gaslit myself for so long, trying to find some peace, some way to convince myself that the way I was living my life, which was the way it was dictated to me, but that the way I was living my life was okay. And there was nothing okay about it. My physical illness was, justification for that. So, yeah, I go back to when you asked, what can we do about it? We have to be honest with ourselves. And you know what? Sometimes it's your parent that is not good for you. Sometimes it's your spouse, and you don't want to end a 25-year relationship or a marriage. You don't want your children to come from what people call a broken family, although I would argue against that verbiage. But, we need to remember that circumstances aren't always forever, but if they're not good for us and if they're causing us that much distress emotionally or physically, and other people are not willing to participate or make effort in improving things, then it's time to move on.
It's interesting. Somebody with so much ego, as all narcissists are,
Mhm.
almost by definition, they cannot have much of a rich inner life.
No, no, I talk about this honesty with ourselves. That's exactly what they are. They're afraid of what they would see if they had any kind of, self-reflection or engaged in any sort of emotional intelligence. And I think that I always used to say, I don't know why I rubbed them all so wrong. And I think it was because I was always the truth seer. I saw the truth and I was so firm on standing in the truth. I didn't understand why people needed to lie and why we needed these stories and why there had to be all these, like, why couldn't we just be? Why couldn't we just be? And that's the thing that they're not able to do because, I noticed that when I'm around people, I am a truth seer and a truth teller. So I always joke that it irritates their demons because I'm reflecting back to them something that they can't handle the reflection of. So yeah, they are not willing to see the truth. They will go to great lengths to protect their lies and to protect what they believe or what they want people to believe about them. It's all, we call it a mask. I call it a facade, whatever it is. And we all sort of wear those masks. How I am with, my best friend isn't how I'm going to be with my priest at church necessarily, or my grandma. So we all very, little parts of ourselves depending who we're with. But overall, narcissists are afraid of anybody seeing who they truly are underneath all that. So they need people to think that again, back to the superiority. That's why you will see them, as you referenced earlier. They are the ones that are out in public. They're charitable and generous, and they're very giving and loving and happy and wonderful and funny and charming. But I always remind people, I'm from the 80s. I'm an 80s kid. I saw Chucky. Chucky was a good guy, wasn't he? He was everybody's friend. Well, not so much, was he?
The thing I can't get over with narcissists is why are they so afraid to look inside? Because looking inside, you can face some tough truths about yourself that aren't always pretty, but that's okay. It's true, and you have it within your power to evolve that, learn from that, do whatever you want to do with that information. And the only thing I can come up with is they must have some sort of trauma in their childhood that is so horrific that they simply cannot face it.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of talk about, and debate about how is a narcissistic personality developed. I do firmly believe it's in childhood. There are people that say genetic. I have not personally read any studies that can convince me of that, but I've seen it go two ways. One where, and I am actually thinking of a specific person. I know, I think we can all think of this. There's that kid in childhood who, we all want to praise and encourage our children, but some are made to believe that they are much, much, much more special
Yeah.
than every other child. And sometimes the parents, it's a little much. They go a little overboard, and that child then grows into that very entitled teenager that knows that it doesn't matter who anybody else is or what they do. They deserve, they're entitled, and they go into adulthood with that, ideology, thinking that they really are superior to other people. They truly think that they are. Um, it's hard to be humble and kind, and selfless when you have that kind of a personality. But then you have the other people, like you said, and this definitely applies to my ex, although I'll bring up an interesting point. When there is perceived trauma or actual trauma, and I think that's important to say perceived, in childhood, when a child feels deficient in any way, whether it is a real existent, family dynamic or what have you, or not, then yes, I think they either turn into like what I did, where you feel unworthy, undeserving, and you become the people pleaser and the overachiever, or you learn, like, watch the children. I always say, watch the kids at the store in the checkout line asking for the candy bar or the package of Skittles, and the mom says no. They put up a fight, right? They
Hmm.
scream, they have a tantrum. Some of them, they know to just put it back and say, okay, I'll try again next time. But the kids who learn that a reaction and a tantrum is going to get them what they want, it's the same thing. Children that are feel that they're neglected emotionally, maybe. This is my ex-husband. He learned as a child to manipulate situations to where he would get attention. He learned to bait that attention from his parents and from other people. And so he went into life thinking that, okay, well, now I'm going to manipulate people. Oh, and when I manipulate people, I can control them. And that's pretty cool. That makes me feel really powerful. And they almost get addicted to it. And I think they know what they're doing, but they do it so unconsciously that they just think that they're rightful to do that. They justify it.
I think unconsciousness is a good word for narcissists, actually.
Yeah, it's very strange because they all it's a very systematic thing. They all say, I mean, they even use the same verbiage. And they use the same tactics. It's strange, but they think they're very special and very unique and all powerful, but it is a very unconscious thing, which is why, I mean, I'm laughing, but there's a lot of people who think they are some alien species because it's so strange that they all behave and speak in the same exact way, no matter where you are in the world. But I'm not sure I buy that just yet.
What are some of the key things you would tell somebody to look for in a narcissist?
you know, it's hard because the narcissism is an issue, but it's also on a spectrum.
Yeah.
So I want to be very clear, and maybe I'll take this time to explain. On the one end of the spectrum, I always tell people it's like a benign tumor. That you can have a tumor, but it's not bothering you, it's just there. And I always liken this to the people that are on social media with the bodies and the hair, and they usually look as good as you think they do, so you can hate them or not hate them, but they're not bothering you, unless it really bothers you that they look so good. But I'm talking about the opposite end, which, just like a malignant tumor, these malignant narcissists will cause you problems. They might even kill you. I hate to sound dramatic, but they are a very significant portion of our US male prison population. And I'm not picking on men. There are lots of female narcissists too, and many of them are in prison as well. But these are the ones that we need to be worried about. These are the violent ones. So I think anytime that you see a sign of disrespecting boundaries, or feeling, again, going back to that feeling of entitlement to
Mhm.
mistreat people, or the expectation to have and receive more than really what is due to any other human being, those are the initial signs where I would say just be on the lookout. And certainly I go back to the language, but somebody can say they love you, but their actions are going to prove how they really feel. And if somebody is saying I love you, but using vulgar language towards you, diminishing you, insulting you, humiliating you, particularly in front of other people, this is not somebody who cares about you. They care about themselves and how they look to others, how they want to look as in control and in charge and dominant. These are not people who are going to consider you in any way, shape, or form.
And there's I mean, I think we live in a fairly narcissistic society, and there's a difference between somebody with narcissistic traits and somebody who's a true narcissist.
100%. And thank you for saying that because, in this realm of trauma and abuse recovery that I find myself in, it's actually very common for people even like me. And I will even admit I have some narcissistic traits, but they are developed as a form of protection against the perceived abuse that we are used to, versus using those tactics to harm somebody else.
Hmm.
So let me give an example. For me, one of my big things is for me to feel safe physically in my environment and emotionally, because if I feel physically safe, it would follow that I would feel emotionally safe. I have a need for predictability.
Hmm.
which means I like to sometimes control things and I might get a little bossy, and this manifests in my marriage. I'm laughing because my husband, even the other day, was chopping an onion, and I was behind him. He's 6'4" and 220, and I'm half his size, and I'm looking around, and what are you doing? How are you chopping that onion? Are you chopping it the right way? What knife are you using? And he just starts laughing. He says, "You don't have to control how I chop an onion." But and this is a very funny example, but we do sometimes, like I said, it can be perceived. I've had people say, "Oh, you're so bossy. You have to be a know-it-all," and it's not that. I'm just trying to feel safe, which is valid considering the domestic violence I've experienced in the past and the physical abuse. But a narcissist, a malignant narcissist, on the other hand, is using tactics intentionally to harm you, to control you, to manipulate you, to gaslight you, and so forth. So I always say the way to really get to the heart of, are you a narcissist, or do you just have narcissistic qualities, is to just ask yourself the question. It sounds silly, but am I a narcissist? No, I know I'm not a narcissist, but I'm worried. If I'm worried that I'm a narcissist, then I can't be, because a narcissist would not be worried about it. Does that make sense? They would just refute everything. You're not going to see them in therapy. They are not trying to claim some mental illness or personality disorder, because that would put them in a category of weakness and inferiority in their brains. And you have to be the crazy one. You're the one that there's something wrong with, not them.
And yet, in reality, you're the one who's sane. Who?
Yes. Yes. But that's and you're right. That's the thing, is that we are the ones, we are trying to, navigate these situations. And I mean, I know, particularly in my marriage, 25 years, I was always like, okay, if I change the way that I show up in this dynamic, then he has to change by, simple dynamic, rules. And so it would always be like, okay, if I'm better, if I'm, I would even Google. I remember the day that I Googled, how can I be a better wife? I was suddenly sad inside, because I'm like, I'm making all this effort. I'm trying so hard, but there was nothing on his part, because he sort of, just like my stepfather, sat on a throne like a king, just very expectant and just waiting. And the second that you didn't do something that aligned with, praising them or providing them with whatever it is that they felt that they deserved, then you were wrong, and you were this and you were that and everything else. So it was always striving to find a way to make them happy and to get their approval. And when I stopped chasing approval from my ex, he knew, he innately knew he had lost me, and we started having some much more serious problems.
Stopping chasing approval is something that women, particularly in my opinion, need to learn.
Yes. Yeah, it comes from unworthiness. I mean, we, I talk about this all the time, but I think that I'm Generation X. I think generational considerations are valid here. Baby boomers, I am married to a baby boomer, and I watch his siblings, and, even his mom and dad, and, people, all the dynamics. Women were generally just supposed to be seen and not heard. You were just supposed to be the little wife who stayed at home and cooked and cleaned and took care of the children and took care of the husband. And then in the 70s, when women burned their bras, and now women work in the workplace, now women have to go to work and make an income and still have dinner on the table and take care of their husband and take care of the kids and clean the house and everything else. But we are still not supposed to have opinions. We're not supposed to have independent thoughts. And honestly, I think, at least with, older generations, they still don't take women, or the fact that women are equal, very seriously. And I have found this in my professional life. I have found this in my personal life. And, fortunately, I'm at the point where I can see what it is, and they just have to feel like they're the big man, and I just kind of be like, okay, understood. And some people you're just not going to get past. Like I always say, you're not going to change a 90-year-old man's mind. And why? There's no point. But I think for the rest of us that are here and that are aware and that want to improve ourselves and society as a whole, we need to start looking at each other as just human,
Yeah.
and take everything else out of it. I don't care what color, religion, anything, gender identity, even, you're a human being. And I think every one of us has to, but we have to find it in ourselves first and stop looking externally for the validation. We have to decide, what I think matters. What, even if it just matters to one person, that's okay. But I'm allowed to have thoughts. I'm allowed to say no as a woman. Guess what? I don't have to tolerate. I don't have to excuse. I don't have to enable. I can choose what I want. And it may not be what the rest of the world feels I should, or should not, for that matter. But I think once we can make that decision for ourselves, that we get to live our life on our terms, you free yourself from all the restrictions, from all the, little boxes people want to put you in, and you're free and you can do what you want. And some people are not going to like it. A lot of people are not going to like it. Even people in your life that you think love you and care about you are not going to like it so much. But you
Well,
know what? You find out real quick who's for you and who's not. And it's your choice who you decide to have in your life. But I think it goes back to choosing yourself. Do you want to live your life, feeling unheard and unseen, and just like you haven't really lived? Or do you want to go, and it's never too late? I always tell people I started over at 45. And you know what I've accomplished in the last 5 years? I've had people joke that it's like letting a wild animal out of a cage. Like I'm just out there doing everything. But you know what? It's fun and I love it, and I'm pursuing my joys and passions. But how many generations of women, and how many women are still out there believing they don't have the right to pursue their joys and passions because it'll take away time from this, or my husband won't like it, or my kids, or what about you? What about you?
and one of the benefits to getting older in this society is that older women start becoming invisible. And you may not be quite there yet, but it's a really profound change in the way the world views you. And yet it is totally liberating because all of a sudden you have the opportunity to not care, to not check those
Yeah.
boxes and go do whatever the heck it is you want to do because nobody notices anyway. But that's a truth all along. And I think that it's so hard. We live in such a difficult world in terms of trying to achieve, trying to fit in, trying to be the good wife, the good person, whatever it is. And it's not until we learn to live from the inside out, not the outside in, that we really start to live. I mean, we're living beforehand, don't get me wrong. We're learning lots of lessons. We're, following our path, whatever it might be. But when you start to live from the inside out, your path changes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It brings to mind, 5 years ago when I was just emerging from, my divorce, and 25 years with a man who did not want me to pursue anything in the field of journalism or psychology, which had been my area of study at the university level. He didn't want me to pursue my real estate career that I had started early in our relationship. He didn't want me to have any success or any sense of pride, or, I couldn't be more than him. He had me scrubbing floors and toilets in this podunk town that he moved me to from Chicago. And I did it because I just thought, okay, it'll make him happy. This is what he wants. This is where he wants to be. But it's interesting to me that 5 years ago, I'm scrubbing toilets and scrubbing floors, cleaning people's houses in this rural farm town that I live in. And now people see me and they're like, you published 3 books, you've been on podcasts all around the world, and you write articles for magazines, and you do all these things. And they're so shocked. And I'm like, but that's what I always intended. That's who I always was. This was what I always wanted to do, was to be a writer, and to be, I wanted to be Barbara Walters. That hasn't happened yet, but well, you never know. But it's just so amazing how when we choose us and we start to bloom, I always like to think of myself as a flower in a garden. I was in this garden where I had all these weeds overshadowing me and protecting the sun from shining on me and preventing the rain from nourishing me. And now that those weeds are out of the way, oh, I'm colorful and I'm blooming and I'm thriving and I have the sun shining on my face and I have the nourishment of the rain and I don't have any weeds sucking the soil out from under me. And it's such a wonderful thing to be rising to who I always truly wanted to be, and I think who I was meant to be. And I think we all have that in us, but we keep those weeds around us because we're afraid of what will happen if we tell those weeds, I want to do something for me instead of always for you, which is a woman thing. I mean, females do that. We're supposed to be the nurturers and the caretakers, but we sacrifice ourselves in that process.